I'm rewatching Outlander from the beginning. Let's talk about episode 6 from season 1, titled The Garrison Commander, specifically this scene between Claire, Dougal, and Blackjack Randall. As always, this will have spoilers for the books or the TV show, so if you are looking to avoid those, please do keep on scrolling. So as I said in my previous video, this episode in particular is not one that I found myself going back to time and time again, but as I have learned so much more about the history of this time and these cultures, I have learned to appreciate it far more. Because the tension that you feel in this scene and what you learn throughout this scene isn't just for dramatic effect, it's very deeply rooted in history and helps explain more clearly for the viewer and the reader why there is so much animosity between the Scots and the British. Up until this point, we as readers and viewers have been getting information about this time period from Claire, as she remembers it, because she learned it from her husband, Frank. And because Frank taught her so much as he was researching Blackjack Randall, it actually benefits her so much just moving through this time period, having any sort of semblance of what's going on in history. But it's another thing entirely to be faced with it and caught in the middle, essentially, of these two cultures like she is in this scene. In the English aristocratic worldview of this era, there was a deep sense of cultural superiority over the Scots. The Scots were seen as barbaric. Their way of life was considered uncivilized or backwards. Their loyalty to clan structure, the Gaelic language, and their more traditional way of life was something that the English looked down upon greatly. And for Dougal, his title as a war chieftain and Colum's as laird really are falling on deaf ears here, because the English see their way of life as being very primitive and they look down upon it deeply, whereas for Dougal, the title of war chieftain or laird has such tremendous power and significance. And so you're seeing this battle of two very different ways of life and custom and worldview clash, and Claire finds herself directly in the center of it. We see this when there's a dismissal of Dougal's title as war chief and the basically mockery of it, and they really kind of had been trying to destroy this traditional way of life in the Highlands for years at this point in time. And so Dougal is approaching this argument with so much animosity built up within him, and all of the men who are of English descent in the room are looking down upon him, and they outnumber him, so it's easy for them to look down upon him even more so. He is essentially alone there with Claire, and Claire doesn't pose as a threat to them either. And while Claire is still an outsider in this scene, she's still connected to the English side of the conflict because she is English, but also because she's looking at the descendant of her husband. And so in the books, we get a little bit more of insight into how she's feeling about this. And what I found interesting in the books is that when she enters the room with all of the British soldiers, she clocks that internally she feels nervous and thinks that it's because she's spent so much time with the Highlanders and learned about how the British have been patrolling the Highlands up until this point, and then has this thought of that it might be silly for her to feel nervous around them, because regardless of the time period, they are men of her country. They share that in common, and very quickly you figure out that that means nothing to them. And Claire approaches this conversation with Blackjack Randall in a very similar fashion to how she normally converses with people, which is trying to outwit him, trying to outsmart him, trying to use what she has of context clues of the time to have the upper hand. She deflects. She doesn't lie like Frank had told her, to stay as close to the truth as possible. But at one point in the books, she does slip up rather heavily. In that opening conversation she has with Blackjack, she tells him the same story that she told Colum, and he questions her being from Oxfordshire because he doesn't know of any Beechams in Oxfordshire. And Claire, in her haste, says, "How would you know you're from Sussex?" And he asks her, "How on earth would you know that?" She quickly rebounds by saying that it's from his accent, something that he points out his family tried very hard to eliminate. And he starts testing Claire by saying, well, how about Corporal Hawkins? Where is he from based on his accent? And you can see the gears spinning in Claire's head in the books where she's trying to figure out, how do I get out of this trap that he has set for me and that I basically set myself? And so when Claire quickly tries to divert the conversation to the crux of it, which is that her main goal is to escape and continue on the journey she was found on initially in episode 1, she figures out that Blackjack is never going to not be suspicious of her. He knows far too much. He's looked into this a little bit more deeply than I think she anticipated. And for him, not knowing what her deal is not going to fly. He needs to get to the bottom of who she is very quickly. And Claire learns that he spent much time after they parted ways in the woods, when she's taken back to the hut and meets all of the Highlanders for the first time, that Blackjack tried to solidify her story, and he was not able to find any bandits in the area. There haven't been any in the area for the last few months, and then suddenly she turns up in the woods and he's not buying her story. And Claire kind of thinks to herself, he's kind of figured me out here, because Blackjack Randall tells her quite candidly, I'm the garrison here. I am able to take the necessary steps and actions to protect it from people I see as a threat. That could be spies, that could be traitors, that could be anyone that I consider suspicious. And she kind of baits him and says, what steps might those be? And that is when he punches her in the stomach. Something that I found jarring in the books, but it literally physically pained me to watch it in the show. And Claire very quickly figures out that the time she's in is not going to be kind to her. She can't weasel her way out of everything, and ultimately her words are not going to help her in this instance, when he can clearly do whatever he wants in this scenario. He has more power than I think she wanted to give him credit for. But also keep in mind that she in the books has looked into the face of him once again and seen such a carbon copy of her husband that she can't separate the two men in her brain. And so it seems really difficult for her to not feel like this was Frank doing this to her. There's a line in the book that I read for the first time where he says, I trust you're not with child, ma'am, because if you are, you won't be for long. And to me, like, Claire, how do you rectify hearing that from someone who's related to your husband? In the books, he says, look up at me. Do you have anything else to say? Because she's been pretty mouthy towards him. And she says, your wig is crooked, and then closes her eyes again. So Claire still has her fight in her in the book scene, and I think the show does a good job of kind of marrying her having that fight, but also being a human that's like deeply upset by what just happened to her, and shocked and confused and all of the things. When Dougal takes her away and comes to her aid and rescues her, it's more than just protection at this point. I think Dougal, his act of protecting the individual, stands for a larger act and symbolic stand against the English and their condescension, but also just their poor treatment of people in general at this time. And it's not just about Claire's safety, it's about resisting the English dominance that feels very personal, and Claire is now deeply, deeply understanding of. They are disrespecting Claire, yes, but they're also disrespecting the laws that he lives by in the Scottish Highlands. And so an attack on Claire at that point is a direct attack on him as well. And you can feel that in this scene. I think there's a lot more weight to it when you know the historical significance as well, because Claire knows what this all leads to. She knows about Culloden, but it's the first time I think that she realizes that if she is going to be present for this moment in history, the right side of history is with these men. And this episode and this moment in this episode is just another way where she continues to sort of lean in that direction here and fall in love with the way that they conduct themselves, their culture, and she really understands deeply what they're fighting for. And I thought that, as disturbing of a scene as this was, it does a very, very good job of conveying that broader message as a whole.